Hey, brothers and sisters. Well, I guess I'm gonna just go ahead and stir the pot again. Um, I've done some videos on um, looking at the rapture in terms of Pentecost, and I've done some that looked into Rosh Hashanah. And kind of the conclusion I came to is you can make a good, solid arguments for either one. And yet, uh, I've also done videos about the doctrine of imminence, and we go through the scriptures, and that's really the only one you can hang your hat on, if you ask me, because um, there's so many passages in the New Testament that warn the church to wait for the coming of your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and so that establishes that doctrine of imminence, and um, the other views of rapture on a feast day all have some drawbacks. And so um, I was looking at a video today. Let me just see if I can pop it up here quick. Um, yeah, here we go. Uh, OT for Jesus. Uh, there's a good brother here. We're email friends, and we've gone back and forth on a few things. I encourage you to come watch this one. He just did it today. Rapture anytime now. Um, he's talking about some things that happened to him here recently and some things that the Lord showed him. And one was about his dad, and his dad was born actually on the Day of Atonement. And as soon as he said that and he was talking about it, I thought, oh, I remember something interesting about what's going to happen on the Day of Atonement. Um, Hang on a sec, there we go. And so we'll get into all that, but the long story short is you can make a plausible argument, kind of like you can for the feast days, for the rapture to happen on a Jubilee. Now, if you're not um familiar with what the Jubilee is from the Bible, it's given in the Old Testament. Let's go into Leviticus 25. The feasts of the Lord are in Leviticus 23. We're going to Leviticus 25. And let me just give you a little bit of an outline here. So the children of Israel have just gone through the Exodus. They're at Mount Sinai, and the Lord's talking to Moses here about, uh, in this case, he's talking about what they shall do when they enter the promised land. And the first thing he's going to speak about here is this cycle of seven. And uh, this is the now famous Shemitah cycle, but basically the Lord is saying, for 6 years you'll work the land, and then in the seventh year um, you'll give the land a rest. And then uh, that uh, Shemitah cycle, God promises to take care of them food-wise in the sixth year, so that they have enough um, food to get through not only the Shemitah year, but they've got to make it till harvest the year following. And God promises He'll watch out for them in that way. And so the children of Israel actually didn't follow the Shemitah cycle in the Old Testament, and that was the cause for them for the Babylonian exile. The first diaspora was specifically because they hadn't followed the Shemitah cycle, and so they were sent away for 70 years because they hadn't given the land a rest since they entered the promised land. And so pretty serious in God's book. And now the next one we're going to look at here is um, the Jubilee. Now the Jubilee, let's just start reading in verse 8. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7 Sabbath of years shall be unto thee 40 and 9 years. And so you get the idea is you have 7 of these Shemitah cycles, which comes up to 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound. Okay? Bang that into your head. On the 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And so why am I hammering on this? Well, I guess I should have put the rapture passages up here, but the Lord shall descend with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and the trump of God, and and then the rest of the passage goes on talking about the rapture, and so that's kind of the hallmark thing. Everybody says they're looking for the trumpet sound to know that we're going home. And in large part, that has a lot to do with why people think the rapture is going to happen on the Rosh Hashanah. But let's hang on to that thought for a second, just so you know that when the Jubilee occurs, you're going to get the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the Day of Atonement, you shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And I'll just note that, the first um, voice of the Lord is the trumpet sound. The first time they heard it was at Mount Sinai here. So I'll just, I'll point to that. You go to Exodus, I think it's 39, I want to say. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to give up on that thought for now, but that's the Jubilee. Now, let's go take a look at Leviticus 25 and verse 24. And in all the land of your possession you shall grant a redemption for the land. And so I'm bringing this up because it could be a little hint. The redemption of the land occurs because they wanted to keep the land in the hands of the family that God had allocated it to. And so in the dire case when um, the the family that owned the land had to sell it um, because they needed money, uh, and the next of kin here, let's just read this. If thy brother be waxen poor and hath sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then shall he redeem which his brother sold. And so here's, I think, a very interesting notion in verses 24 and 25, because it sets up the notion of one of the roles of the kinsman redeemer. And again, this is Jewish, very Jewish, but this is going to come into play here now in a second. So um, let's take a look first at Isaiah 61 verses 1 through 3, and take a look at some prophecy that Jesus actually went and claimed for himself as his first act of his ministry. Verse 61. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow tonight. You know what? This thing is just rolling through my head, and I sort of am trying to resolve it as I'm talking to you, which I should probably stop doing. Um, but I told you there's issues with all of these, and I'll talk about a little bit of an issue even with this view of rapture and the Jubilee. And I should just stop trying to solve it because it's making me go slow. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives. What does that sound like? And the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn. Let's just read one more verse. To appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness and planting of the Lord, that might be glorified. And so that's some powerful passages. Now let's take a look in Luke 4. Jesus actually quotes this to kick off his ministry. go down to verse 17. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. So this is Jesus starting his ministry. He goes into his first synagogue here where he's going to speak. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised." And so he's going right back here and quoting out of Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 3 in this set of passages. Now, he stopped uh, halfway through a sentence, and this is a very famous pause that everybody brings out. Let's go right back to Isaiah 61. And where did he stop? He stopped to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and then he stopped. He didn't say, "and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn." And then the next thing he's talking about here is to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion and give them beauty for ashes. So if you want to think about it, this day of vengeance of our God is either the tribulation period and or the day of his second coming, okay? And then he sets up the millennial kingdom because he's restoring the people of Israel, and then basically the old places will rise up from desolations, and everything gets restored, and the flocks and blah blah blah. So sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way. I just mean it goes on from there, and I gotta cut it off here. So I didn't mean to say blah blah blah. Um, but did you catch that? Um, he's talking with language of the Jubilee to restore the land and to redeem the people. That's what he's saying, and that's and to proclaim liberty to the captives. That's exactly what we read in the Jubilee verses, right? So I challenge you to go back, read these over and over, back and forth, and you'll see what I mean. Now let's go to Revelation 5:9 and look at something kind of cool. Okay, Revelation 5:9. And now 4 and 5, pre-trib rapture folks, definitely see the churches in heaven. They're modeled by the elders in verses 4 and 5. And then you see Jesus about to open this. He's got the scroll. He's about to open the seals. And now we're in verse 9. And this is the elders here, I think. Yes. And they sung a new song. Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou was slain and has redeemed us. There's the slaves being redeemed by thy blood out of every kindred, tongue, people, and nation. And, that thou now be kings and priests and shall reign on earth. And so we heard, here's the people redemption. And most people that take a look at this seven sealed scroll here that he's got. It has writing both within and on back here in verse 1. And many people say that, in Old Testament times, that's the way title deeds were set up. The writing on the outside told you what property was being defined. Writing on the inside was the agreement or the deed. And so Jesus here is reclaiming both the land and the people. And what is the Jubilee year for? To reclaim the land and the people. So isn't that pretty powerful? So I think we got this really strong tie to the Jubilee that you can make out of this. And one more, log on the fire, but we just don't have time to go do it, is Revelation 4 and 5. Classically, like if you listen to a Chuck Missler exposition or a commentary, he'll take you right to the book of Ruth and tell you need to read it, because the book of Ruth shows you what a kinsman redeemer does. And so, Ruth is Ruth and Naomi are redeemed, and because Ruth gets married, and then the land that was Naomi's gets restored by the kinsman redeemer by purchasing it, right? And so that's how you get in the book of Ruth this picture of the kinsman redeemer, but you also get a picture of the church. And that's again, a whole nother study, but you take the allegory, and Boaz is, you know, Jesus, and Ruth is the church, and Naomi is Israel. And if you just take those parallels and you walk the story through, you see this redeemer process. And so, Jubilee, about the redemption of the land and the people, um, Leviticus 25. Paints this in verses 8 through 12, and then in verse 24. Isaiah is the commissioning of what Jesus was, the passage, the prophecy of what Jesus was going to do, and he stops. This says both at his first and second coming. It splits it right in the verse about the day of God's vengeance. But then when it's quoted, when Jesus quoted it, he stopped right at that first split where it's the acceptable year of the Lord, but not the day of the vengeance. Okay. So this whole thing is a redemption set of passages that fits the Jubilee. So, okay, I hit that one hard. Now I'm going to have 3 million skeptics, and I suppose I'd be 3,000,001 because I can make the arguments on Rosh Hashanah and I can make the argument on Pentecost as being also good models for the rapture. And so I just want to toss a bone out there, though, and say um, that, I mean, if if the rapture happened on one of those 2 days, nobody's going to care because we're going to be in heaven. But I do want to point out some of the things that are challenges, just so that you keep the open mind about potentially rapture on a jubilee, or potentially the doctrine of imminence, which is the real one I want you to hang on to if you haven't been so sold down one of these paths that you can't consider something else. So for Rosh Hashanah, let's just take a look at a couple of things quick. If we go to Matthew 24, you know, everybody's favorite set of verses in here, Matthew 24, and it's in verse 32. Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you see all these things, know that it's near, even at the doors. So the interesting thing, and again, I don't have time in this video to drain all of Matthew and to put it into context, but I'll give you the short handle is Matthew's gospel was written to convince the Jews that Jesus was their Messiah. So the context of all these passages is pleading with the Jews or prophesying to the Jewish community that Jesus is the Messiah and what will he do and how is it going to work. Okay, so with that context, you get even more now. Learn the parable of the fig tree. Well, the fig or the fig tree is a model of Israel, and the figs are the people. Okay, and so you again you get that. I think it's in. I want to say Zechariah. It might be in Micah, where he's showing two bushel baskets or whatever of figs. One, they're very good, and the other one, they're bad. And you know, you paint Israel into it. You also get this um, where Jesus went and cursed the fig tree right before, uh, you know, the week before he was going to go to the cross. He cursed the fig tree, and it died from the root up. And everybody was amazed. Well, because they were going to send Jesus to the cross, the Jewish nation received the curse, and that's how you see this modeling that Matthew is about the Jewish people. And so you got to keep that context. So people look at this now. One of the arguments for Rosh Hashanah is in Matthew 24:36. You say, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. People will argue that language is the language of a wedding. And it happens only on Rosh Hashanah that you don't know the day or the hour because it's a 2-day festival based on when the new moon is sighted. But if you say, well, the church isn't being pictured in Matthew, it's for trying to convince the Jewish people that Jesus was their Messiah. Um, and again, I don't have time to build that out, that this passage isn't about the church. Matter of fact, you can make a pretty strong argument. I'm going to talk about this in a second. That this nobody knows the day or the hour is probably Rosh Hashanah, but it's applying to the Jewish people, and we'll get there in a minute. Okay, and then Noah is the next thing referenced, but as the days of Noah, so shall the coming of Son of Man be. And again, this then would, in context, would be the second coming, not the rapture. And so, why is the day of Noah important in this context? Well, one is the days of Noah included the notion of the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and after. You get that in Genesis 6, but you also learn that the world was so corrupt, probably in large part because of the Nephilim before the flood, that God had to send the deluge on the earth to kill everybody, and Noah was found to be pure in his generations, or pure genetically, and so he was saved through it. And so Noah here being a type of the Jewish people being preserved through the flood. And just as a note, Enoch, who has prophetically a lot of picturing and affinity to the church, Enoch was raptured before the flood, and then Noah and his family was preserved through the flood. And that modeling works because you see in the throes of the uh, Revelation judgments there in 6 through 18, you see at the midpoint that God tells the Jewish people to flee to the mountains, and they go to Petra, and he shelters them for 3.5 years. It's exactly typing out what we've got here. Noah was preserved through the flood, so it's Jewish in its representation is what I'm trying to get to. I hope you followed that, because this is a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. But now the other big controversial one, I just got to say these, and if you need me to go spell it out more, I guess message me offline and we'll get into it. Then you get into these verses 33 to the end. Uh, Let me see here. I don't want to do that. I want to talk about the taken and left verses. Um, okay, so we talked about Noah. Then down here, verse 40. Then two shall be in the field, one shall be taken and the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Now, and then watch, therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. Now, Dr. Thomas Ice actually does a whole study on which verses are rapture oriented and which verses are second coming oriented. If I remember this right, one of the ways you can pick this off is you're supposed to watch for the second coming, but the church is supposed to wait for the appearance of the Lord in terms of the rapture. And so here we have one of these watch because you don't know when the Lord is coming. So it's again another little brick on the second coming context here. And what is going on though? Why is one taken and one left? And I'll argue, and I've done this in a bunch of videos, but I'm assuming a lot of people will be new to this video because rapture will be in the keywords. If you go to Ezekiel 20, it's really cool. The first half of Ezekiel 20 is about God talking about what happened with the children of Israel when they were brought to Mount Sinai, and he recounts the promises and what happened to them. And then you get down here in verse 33, because they rebelled in all this. Now you get this division, and God says, "As I liveth, saith the Lord God, surely with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and with fury poured out, I will rule over you, and I will bring you out of the people, and will gather you out of the countries wherein you are scattered, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with fury poured out." Now, at the end of the first diaspora, that didn't happen. A small fraction of the Jewish people came back, and I think it was 50,000. Yet, after the second coming, all of the people come back into the land, but first they're judged, and the Gentiles are judged at the sheep and goat judgment. We see that in Matthew 25, and the Jewish people are judged here. Um, he brings them out of all the countries where they're scattered. So this is the end of the second diaspora for all, both Judah and Israel. Uh, and I'll bring you into the wilderness of the people and plead with you face to face, like as I plead with your fathers in the wilderness in the land of Egypt. So I will plead with you, saith the Lord God, and I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I'll bring you into the bond of the covenant. Now that's um, passing under the rod. He's going to separate out the believer from the unbeliever, just like the Gentiles are going to get at the sheep and goat judgment. And I'll bring you into the bond of the covenant. Now that's interesting because I think the covenant that's being referenced here, since the context of what they rebelled against was really the marriage of God the Father to his people Israel, they broke that bond. He's going to bring them back into the bond of the covenant. So now for people that want to argue that Rosh Hashanah pictures a wedding, it could be right here. God did not throw his bride away, but he's going to re-bring her back into the bond of the covenant. And for people that like types and analogies, you can go back to Vashti and Esther. And Vashti wouldn't come when she was called, just like the Jewish people didn't come when Jesus came. And so she was set aside, and Esther was chosen, which was the church. Well, here I think what we're going to see is the bond of the covenant, is he's re-covenanting to the nation of Israel um, the original relationship. And I'll purge out from among you the rebels and them that transgress against me. I'll bring them forth out of the country where they sojourn. They shall not enter into the land of Israel, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. And so there you go. The rebels are purged out, and the believers come into the land. And so this is what I'm going to I'll probably use a term people won't like, but in Matthew 24, I think what we're getting is the rapture words used out of Matthew 24 is the separating of the Jewish people from the Gentiles. And we know when you get into the millennium, the Jewish people are again a chosen people, and all the goods of the earth are streamed to them. So the Jew and the Gentile are going to be re-separated in the millennial reign. This is the separation. Then the rebels get purged. And then in Matthew 25, the sheep and goat judgment, you see Jesus says, whatever you did to the least of these, my brother. Well, in reference, he's probably talking to these already purged out believing Jewish folks, and then he judges the nations based on how they treated the Jewish people. So it's pretty powerful there, but I think it also this explanation solves why you can get wedding language in Rosh Hashanah, but it doesn't relate to the church. I think God's reestablishing the original relationship that was intended at Mount Sinai, and it was in Exodus 19. I couldn't remember that from before. So, I know that's a lot. I'm sorry. It's just like this big download, but that's why Rosh Hashanah may not be the rapture, okay? Now, Pentecost, you've got real interesting modeling here, because in 1 Corinthians 15, and I'm not going to take time to read it since we're already moving along here, Jesus was the first fruits, and that happened at, you got first, you got Passover, then unleavened bread, and then first fruits. And those three feasts are right in a row on the very specific days that were said in Leviticus 23. And so Jesus then would be representative of the first fruits of the barley harvest. And if you read 1 Corinthians 15, 20 through 26, you can get that. It's Paul's very clear. And then the next harvest is the harvest that the first fruit of the next harvest is the wheat harvest. And people think, well, there you go. That's when the church gets raptured. Is Jesus went in the first fruit of the barley harvest, and then the church is going to be the first fruit of the wheat harvest. And the only problem here is that back in the biblical times when the New Testament was being written and before, there was a device called the tribulum that was rubbed over the harvested wheat to break out the outer husk. And so I think if this modeling was going to be used, you'd apply it maybe more to the tribulation saints, maybe, than the church. So I think you get a little bit of confusion in here, and the fact that Pentecost was fulfilled already at the day of Pentecost. So there are some challenges with Pentecost. Let's just let that go. There's more that you could put into each one of these buckets, but for the sake of time, just know that, Rosh Hashanah can be challenged. It's one everybody loves, and you get a lot of Messianic believers think that it's just automatic. It's Rosh Hashanah, and I think there's a different answer to why it may not be. And then Pentecost is typically the favorite of dispensational believers, and there's still some challenges with that one as well. So, okay, now we're going to go into, goofy land. So plop on your tinfoil hat. I'm saying this tongue in cheek because I don't want anybody too whipped up about what I'm going to show you. Okay, this is just come see Brother Brian here, OT for Jesus, Rapture Anytime Now. I'll put the link down below. Um, let me show you this here first. Okay, this is TorahCalendar.com. This is this year. And notice some interesting things here. We're in the year 6000. So these guys, claim, go to TorahCalendar.com and read what they tried to do here. They tried to build an accurate calendar using, scientific data from astronomy, the movement of the stars, and all that, to say what are the actual days on God's calendar. And it just so happens here in 2014 on August 19th that we're in the spiritual year, spiritual meaning when was Adam created? When did Genesis 1, or actually let's start with Genesis 2 because of the little potential gap there between verse 1 and verse 2. When was Genesis 2 pointing to? Well, it's back here, whatever that is, 5 whatever BC, and we're in the Jubilee year 120. Okay, so and the spiritual year 6000. So that's really interesting. Now, in terms of Jubilees, look at this. If they calculate everything right in terms of the start of God's program, you get 2,000 years. Adam, I think it's to Abraham. I think that's right. And then you get 2,000 years to Christ, and then you get 2,000 years from Christ to now, and boom, we're at the third now. That's here's 40 jubilees, 40 more jubilees, so that's 80 jubilees, and then boom, we come right here to the 120th jubilee. Now, why is that important? And you can see right down here, Yom Kippur this year is Jubilee 120, according to them. And so let's just go into the meaning of numbers, and getting this out of BibleStudy.org. The number 120 can symbolize a divinely appointed time of waiting. After God saw how sinful and dedicated to evil man had become after the Garden of Eden, he determined a 120-year period would be given for repentance, and then the flood would come. Okay, and so 120 divinely appointed time of waiting, and that related to the building of the ark, but maybe in a more macro sense, 120 could be waiting 120 of these cycles. And so you can come down here and see all the other uses of 120. But there's also, curiously here, let's go look. I don't think I documented this, but it's in Genesis 6, no less. I think it's in verse 3. Yeah, and the Lord said, my spirit will not always strive with man, so that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now that's really curious, because what if it, yes, man is typically doesn't live longer than 120 years after the flood. So that's true, but could this be a broader meaning, meaning man is only going to live 120 jubilees? And so I'm just going to toss that out there as a possible interpretation. I don't know. The 120 jubilees ends with the rapture of the church, but we all know we still got 1,000 years after that in the millennial reign. So maybe that modeling isn't perfect, but it's 120. You could use this to say it fits the definition that we were given, that it's symbolizes a divinely appointed time of waiting. Well, if a man's life is 120 years, that fits. In 120 jubilees, if it ends with the church raptured, it definitely is a time of waiting that we all want to see come to an end, because the earth groaned from the fall, right? The earth and Adam and Eve and all of their descendants had been groaning from back then. That's why I went into those redemption passages, because the earth's going to get redeemed and the fallen people are going to be redeemed. So I do think there's something to this 120 being significant. Okay. One last thing before we wrap this, I have to point to it. I see a little bit of issue with Torah calendar plopping the 120th Jubilee year here when the Shemitah year, at least according to Jonathan Cahn and some of the work that they've been doing, is 2015. And that would be if 2015 was the Shemitah year, it would be the year after. If that was the end of a Jubilee cycle, it'd be the year after that. It'd be 2016 potentially, or 2016 for the Jubilee year to start. And so I'm not sure those are all lining up exactly right. I'm just going to leave that out there as a challenge to the Jubilee year theory that I'm trying to build here. But I think there's really some compelling stuff here in terms of looking at what's being redeemed, Jesus being the kinsman redeemer, redeeming earth and people, reversing the fall. And we know when we get into the millennial reign, we have, Garden of Eden-like conditions for the earth, and we have, the saints and all those that went through resurrection. They've been redeemed as well. So there's my argument for rapture on a Jubilee. What do you guys think? Talk to you later, saints.